Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in a world very different from the one you know. It is the 14th century. The countryside is stitched together with narrow dirt roads and crumbling stone walls. Towns are little more than clusters of timber and thatch, ringed by fields that yield just enough on good years to keep bellies full through winter. In this world, comfort is rare, rest is brief, and security is always uncertain. But now, imagine a shadow creeping across this landscape, a darkness that respects neither rank nor innocence. It arrives with the chill of autumn winds or the dampness of spring. It slips in quietly, a fever here, a cough there, the faint whisper of dread passed from neighbor to neighbor. Soon it grows into something monstrous, the Black Death, the plague, the invisible terror that rewrites the story of every village, every family, every soul it touches. Surviving in the age of plague is not about heroic quests or dramatic escapes. There are no gallant knights or wise kings waiting to save the day. Instead, there are the ordinary men and women who wake up each morning to a world smaller, lonelier, and harsher than it was the night before. They carry on day after day, not because they expect a reward or a happy ending, but because there is no other choice. This is not the history of great battles or famous names. This is the story of endurance, the endless work of the blacksmith, the quiet despair of the widow, the stubborn routines of a peasant farmer, the unheralded courage of healers and priests, and the countless invisible acts that make survival possible, one day at a time. These are stories shaped by hunger, grief, and the constant presence of fear, but also by resilience, small kindnesses, and the hope that refuses to die even in the longest winters. In this series, Boring History for Sleep, Why It Sucked to Be a Medieval Plague Survivor, you'll find not drama, but the slow, steady rhythms of real medieval life. You'll hear about mud-caked boots and cold hands, about the taste of stale bread and the sound of empty streets. You'll walk alongside the forgotten, blacksmiths, widows, priests, peasants, herbalists, and more, each struggling to survive and find meaning in a world that has turned suddenly unfamiliar. Let these stories take you to another time, a time when survival was itself a victory, when the bravest thing anyone could do was simply to carry on, settle in, breathe deeply, and let the quiet struggles and enduring spirit of medieval plague survivors guide you gently into sleep. Are you ready to begin? Imagine yourself living in the early 14th century, a quiet village nestled somewhere in medieval Europe. Life here on any ordinary day revolves around routine and repetition. The rhythmic clang of metal against metal echoes softly through cobbled streets as the sun begins its slow ascent. In the center of this modest hamlet, your ears guide you toward the forge, where the local blacksmith, a man named Godfrey, has already begun his day's work. Godfrey, an unassuming figure, bears the unmistakable marks of his craft, deep lines etched by heat and smoke into his weathered face. His skin carries permanent stains of soot, his powerful arms and hands scarred by countless sparks and errant blows. To the villagers, Godfrey is simply part of their landscape, a constant, reliable presence who shapes metal into the necessary tools of daily survival: horseshoes, farming implements, nails, hinges, and occasionally the rare weapon or suit of armor. But Godfrey's steady, predictable life is disrupted by a quiet, unseen menace: the arrival of the plague. The Black Death, a grim visitor, sweeps mercilessly through towns and villages indifferent to wealth or rank. Neighbors disappear overnight, families vanish from sight, and yet Godfrey remains bound to his forge by necessity and duty. Each morning, as he steps into his forge, Godfrey is reminded that survival in these harsh times means constant vigilance. The smithy, a dim room glowing orange from the fire, smells perpetually of coal smoke and iron filings. Tools, heavy tongs, worn hammers, and chisels are arranged methodically along soot-stained walls. A pile of raw iron sits patiently in the corner, awaiting transformation, indifferent to the turmoil outside. His day begins at dawn, feeding the forge's fire with charcoal, carefully controlling airflow with the large bellows. Godfrey works methodically, each movement precise from years of repetition. heating metal to a glowing red, hammering it steadily, shaping it into purposeful items. This is Godfrey's quiet rebellion against chaos. Amidst death and uncertainty, the rhythm of his labor remains unwavering. Godfrey's skills become increasingly vital as the plague ravages the countryside. Tools break, horseshoes wear thin, and weapons once ceremonial are sharpened anew as fear spreads. Villagers, those few who remain, approach cautiously, wary of infection, but desperate for his expertise. Transactions are brief and quiet, exchanges of necessity rather than friendship. Yet even amid a pandemic, the blacksmith's life remains astonishingly mundane. Meals are simple: bread, cheese, and watered ale, eaten hastily between tasks. Personal hygiene, sparse as it already was, is now tinged with anxiety. Hands scrubbed in water mixed with vinegar. A faint hope of keeping infection at bay. Nights are brief respites. Godfrey's rest is frequently disturbed by worries of unfinished orders or the fear of waking to illness or death. Despite the simplicity and repetitiveness of his life, small moments of humanity punctuate Godfrey's existence. He might glance up, noticing a rare sunrise filtering gently through the smoke, or pause briefly as birdsong drifts into the forge, stark against the sound of his work. Occasionally, a surviving child, curious and lonely, watches from afar, afraid to approach but comforted somehow by the blacksmith's steady presence. As days blur into weeks, then months, Godfrey becomes increasingly aware of the silent void growing around him. Where the streets once bustled quietly with daily chores, they now echo emptily. His neighbors, the cooper, the baker, the tailor, many succumbed silently, unnoticed until their absence became too apparent to ignore. Godfrey's work continues, ever essential yet increasingly isolated. This isolation is perhaps the hardest burden Godfrey carries. As a blacksmith, he was never truly alone. His forge had been a meeting place, villagers exchanging news, gossip, and companionship. Now, these encounters are rare and brief. Godfrey feels the weight of silence as heavily as the iron in his hands. In such isolation, one's thoughts can wander into darker realms. Godfrey often contemplates his existence. Why has he survived, when so many others have perished? Is it luck, skill, or simply fate's arbitrary choice? Perhaps his relentless labor shields him somehow, keeps the plague at bay through sheer determination and routine. Yet, he knows logically that survival is fickle. Each breath feels like borrowed time. Routine becomes both his salvation and his punishment. The forge must be tended, the metal shaped, the community supported in whatever modest way remains possible. Yet each day, repetition slowly drains his spirit. Purpose begins to fade into monotonous obligation. In these quiet moments, Godfrey reflects upon his younger years, a time when he dreamed of adventure, of seeing distant lands and experiencing more than the confines of his village forge. Those youthful aspirations now seem distant, almost foreign to him. Survival has reduced his dreams to simpler wishes: another day without illness, another finished task. Even when news finally reaches him that the plague is beginning to subside elsewhere, Godfrey knows recovery will not be swift. Too many lives have vanished, leaving lasting scars on the community. The blacksmith realizes he will be needed more than ever. Tools and supplies must be rebuilt, lives restarted, and livelihoods reclaimed. But who rebuilds the soul? Who repairs the emotional and spiritual damage left by such relentless hardship? At the end of another tiring day, as Godfrey carefully cools his forge, he stands silently, looking out upon his now quiet village. A few faint lights flicker through closed shutters, signs of life stubbornly persisting. Tomorrow will come again, bringing with it more heat, more hammering, more quiet endurance. Godfrey sighs deeply, a sigh weighted with exhaustion and yet tempered by resilience. As he finally closes the doors to his forge, you might wonder, as Godfrey does in these quiet moments, what deeper purpose does such mundane survival serve? In an age ravaged by disease, death, and isolation, What truly sustains a human spirit day after relentless day? Perhaps the answer lies not in grand heroics or epic tales, but in these humble, boring details. The steady rhythm of a blacksmith's hammer, the quiet resilience of ordinary people, and their stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. And so, dear listener, as Godfrey extinguishes his forge for the night, you are left contemplating. In a world reshaped by plague and uncertainty, what quiet strength does it take to rise each morning, face the forge, and begin again? The dawn arrives quietly, spilling weak rays of morning sunlight through the cracks in Godfrey's weather-beaten shutters. You might think waking would be easier now, routine breeds familiarity after all. But mornings these days carry a heaviness he struggles to shake. Godfrey rubs his calloused palms together, the roughness familiar but never comforting. Each morning, he awakens with a jolt of anxiety, a nagging whisper in the back of his mind asking, "Will today be the day the plague finds me? Plague finds me?" With effort, Godfrey pushes himself from the rough straw mattress, the creak of old wood beneath his feet punctuating the silence. Dressing methodically, he fastens a stained leather apron around his waist, worn so thin you might wonder how it still protects him. His movements are automatic, though slower than they once were, burdened by fatigue and solitude. As he steps outside into the empty street, Godfrey shivers slightly. The air, crisp and unforgiving, bites at his skin, yet it carries a peculiar quietness. A village once filled with sounds of laughter, shouting, and daily commotion now seems almost ghostly. He briefly recalls happier days, when children ran laughing past his door, mothers calling after them. But those sounds are mere echoes now, fading memories that haunt his waking hours. Reaching his forge, Godfrey unlocks its doors with an iron key so worn it slips easily into the lock, barely making a sound. He pauses a moment before entering, breathing deeply as if to fortify himself against the day's work. For Godfrey, the forge has always been a sanctuary, a place where problems fade beneath the comforting rhythms of his labor. Yet now, even this refuge feels tainted by the plague's lingering shadow. Inside, the smell of coal smoke, iron dust, and sweat immediately envelops him. It's a scent you might recoil from, but to Godfrey, it is oddly comforting, a tangible sign of his purpose, his value, his stubborn refusal to be erased by disease. With practiced hands, he reignites the fire, carefully stoking it until flames leap and dance again, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. As the iron heats to a glowing red, Godfrey's thoughts drift, unbidden, to those he has lost. Faces appear clearly before him, faces he knows he'll never again see outside memory. Eleanor, the village midwife, her laughter always booming loudly through the marketplace. Thomas, the gentle carpenter whose quiet kindness held families together, and young Agnes, barely 10, whose shy smile always made Godfrey pause his hammering, just long enough to wave. All gone, vanished silently overnight. He wonders quietly to himself, "Why have I survived while they have not?" But there's no answer, only silence, broken by the ringing blows of his hammer as he pounds the glowing metal into submission. He throws himself into work, channeling grief into motion. Each blow echoes sharply, metal ringing on metal, a sound almost angry in its persistence. It reverberates through empty streets, through empty homes. Godfrey wonders if anyone else hears it anymore, or if it only echoes within himself. As midday approaches, a hesitant knock at the forge door interrupts his reverie. Godfrey stiffens instinctively, fear flickering across his face. Visitors often bear news of death these days, but he quickly composes himself, clears his throat, and calls out, "Enter." In a voice he tries to keep firm, the door creaks open slowly, revealing Mary, the baker's wife, now painfully, the baker's widow. Her eyes, red-rimmed and tired, avoid his gaze as she steps cautiously inside. Godfrey sees immediately, the pain etched deeply in her face. "Master Godfrey," Mary begins softly, voice trembling slightly. "My oven. The hinges are broken. I I can't bake bread without them. Her words catch, and she looks down, ashamed perhaps by her vulnerability. Godfrey nods gently, compassion evident in his tired eyes. I understand, Mary. I'll fix it today, I promise. His voice is gentle, reassuring, though inside he feels his heart tighten. The forge is no longer simply a place for metalwork. It's become a center of quiet desperation, a lifeline holding together the few remaining strands of normalcy. Mary leaves, her footsteps fading softly into silence, and Godfrey sighs deeply. He quickly begins heating a piece of metal, shaping hinges expertly with swift, precise movements. Each strike a promise kept. Though his muscles ache and his spirit is heavy, he feels some small measure of satisfaction, knowing he can at least ease the burden for those who remain. As the hinges cool slowly in water, Godfrey's mind wanders again, reflecting on the strange way the plague has stripped life down to its bare essentials. Joy, laughter, friendship. These seem distant, unreachable luxuries now. Survival has replaced ambition, daily tasks have become acts of courage, and simply waking up feels heroic. Godfrey considers this quietly, then wonders aloud, almost bitterly. Is this what life has become? Endless toil with only death as certainty? Yet even as he speaks these grim thoughts, he feels defiance rising within him. Perhaps he thinks surviving is itself an act of rebellion, a refusal to allow tragedy, the final victory. There is strength, after all, in quiet resilience, in mundane acts of care and service. He finds himself smiling faintly at the absurdity, the painful beauty, of continuing to forge hinges in a world falling apart. Evening descends, casting long shadows across the empty village streets. Godfrey steps outside, hinges wrapped carefully, in rough cloth. He walks slowly toward Mary's bakery, feeling the weight of isolation lift slightly, if only momentarily. Knocking gently at her door, he hands Mary the hinges without words, seeing gratitude light briefly in her weary eyes. Returning to his home, Godfrey sits quietly, staring into the fading embers of his hearth fire. The emptiness of his house presses heavily upon him, yet within the silence he hears echoes, not of his hammer but of voices past. Friends, neighbors, loved ones, people whose stories intertwined with his own, now merely ghosts of memory. He finds himself whispering softly, as if afraid to disturb these fragile echoes. I promise, I won't forget you. The words hang in the quiet darkness, a small defiance against oblivion. As Godfrey climbs wearily into bed, sleep comes reluctantly. Dreams arrive fitfully, haunted by faces lost and the constant ringing of his hammer, a rhythm he cannot escape even in slumber. Yet within these dreams he senses something more. Hope, perhaps, or simply the stubborn persistence of life. Whatever it is, it calls gently to him, urging him to rise again tomorrow, to face the forge once more. And you might wonder, as Godfrey slips slowly into restless sleep, what does it mean to truly survive? Is it enough merely to endure, to continue breathing, working, existing, or must there be something deeper, more profound, guiding us through darkness? Tomorrow will come, inevitably, bringing more toil, more struggle, more quiet acts of rebellion. Yet tonight, beneath darkness punctuated only by distant starlight, one question lingers clearly, unanswered, in the silence. What keeps us going when life itself feels unbearable? Morning arrives yet again, gently nudging Godfrey from an uneasy sleep. He blinks, rubbing tired eyes, greeted by the soft murmur of birds outside, a rare comfort amid endless silence. Lying still for a moment, he contemplates the heavy quiet, enveloping the village, a silence born not merely from emptiness but from loss. Each dawn brings another reminder. The plague has reshaped everything. Pushing aside his worn blankets, Godfrey rises slowly, the ache in his bones deeper today than usual. The fire in his hearth has died, leaving only cold ash behind. He hesitates briefly, feeling uncharacteristically weary, asking himself, can I keep going, day after day like this? But he knows already. There is no real choice. Survival has become his quiet rebellion, his daily affirmation of life's stubborn resilience. He dresses mechanically, leather apron heavy around his waist, a familiar weight he carries willingly. The streets outside greet him with emptiness, save for a soft breeze whispering through deserted homes. Where once doors opened to the morning bustle, they now remain shut, mute witnesses to tragedy. Godfrey sighs deeply, a breath filled with both sorrow and quiet determination. Even loneliness becomes routine eventually. Arriving at the forge, he begins his daily ritual, tending the fire, heating the metal, shaping essential tools with practiced hands. His hammer, worn smooth by years of labor, feels comforting in his grip, yet today something feels different. Perhaps it is the heavy weight of solitude finally pressing too hard. Or perhaps it's the quiet realization that he needs more than just survival. Today, he craves connection, a reminder that he is still human. His musings are interrupted by the hesitant creak of the forge door opening. Godfrey turns, surprised. Visitors have become increasingly rare. Standing shyly in the doorway is young Thomas, a thin, timid boy of no more than 10. Thomas's eyes are wide, haunted by loss yet bright with curiosity. His voice, barely more than a whisper, breaks the silence. "Master Godfrey, do you need help today?" Godfrey's heart softens instantly, warmed by the simple offer. "Come in, Thomas," he says kindly, offering the faintest smile. "I could indeed use another pair of hands." The boy steps inside cautiously, eyes scanning the forge in awe. Godfrey watches him gently, reminded suddenly of his own youth, apprentice to his father, a time when life felt simpler, filled with endless possibilities. Thomas looks expectantly toward him, uncertain but hopeful, and Godfrey feels something stir within, a sense of purpose renewed. "Come," he instructs gently, handing the boy a small hammer. "I'll show you how to shape a nail. Every smith starts here." Thomas nods earnestly, absorbing Godfrey's quiet instructions. Soon, the rhythmic clang of metal fills the forge, the older blacksmith guiding the young boy's inexperienced hand. In these simple acts, hammering, shaping, teaching, Godfrey rediscovers the humanity he'd begun to fear he'd lost. Throughout the day, their conversations remain sparse but meaningful. Thomas reveals quietly that he's alone now, family lost to the plague, surviving by scavenging and sheer determination. Godfrey listens patiently, nodding thoughtfully, recognizing echoes of his own pain in the boy's hesitant words. Yet beneath Thomas's sadness lies a quiet strength, resilience forged through hardship, just as iron is shaped by heat and blows. As evening descends, they sit together briefly outside the forge, sharing bread and watered ale in companionable silence. Finally, Thomas looks up shyly, voice filled with uncertainty. "Can I come back tomorrow, Master Godfrey?" Godfrey smiles softly, warmth lighting his tired eyes. "Of course, Thomas. There's always room here for you." The boy departs, slowly, his footsteps fading gently into the evening quiet. Godfrey watches him go, heart lighter than it's been in months. That night, Godfrey sits alone by the fire, reflecting on the day. Though exhaustion tugs at his body, his mind feels clearer, more at peace. He thinks again of Thomas, of the boy's quiet strength, his simple yet powerful courage. Perhaps Godfrey realizes this is what survival truly means, not merely continuing to breathe, to labor, but finding connection, purpose, and hope, even amid relentless darkness. The following days see Thomas returning faithfully each morning brighter than before. Together they shape nails, mend hinges, and slowly begin to rebuild, piece by careful piece, the small routines that once defined their village. With every passing day, Godfrey feels life returning, quiet hope rekindled by companionship. Weeks slowly blend into months, and eventually, faint signs of normalcy begin to reappear around them. Neighbors cautiously open shutters, Voices tentatively greet each other in passing. Godfrey sees gratitude reflected quietly in their eyes. Gratitude not merely for repairs and practical help, but for the stubborn resilience he's quietly embodied. Yet, even as life cautiously reasserts itself, Godfrey senses the lasting scars left behind by the plague. Loss still lingers heavily. Healing will not come quickly. But amid the rubble, he's discovered something unexpected. Strength forged through simple acts of kindness, resilience renewed through quiet companionship. One evening, Thomas sits beside him, quietly polishing tools. He looks thoughtful, then turns shyly to Godfrey. "Do you ever wonder, Master Godfrey," he asks softly, "if things will ever be normal again?" Godfrey pauses, considering deeply, then nods slowly. "Normal, Thomas, will never be quite what it was. But perhaps someday it might even be better, built stronger by everything we've overcome." Thomas nods thoughtfully, seeming comforted by the older man's quiet assurance. They sit together in peaceful silence, comforted by companionship, strengthened by shared experience. In the weeks that follow, life gradually settles into a new routine. The village, though forever changed, begins quietly to rebuild itself around Godfrey's forge. People come to him often, not merely for repairs, but seeking comfort in his steady presence. His forge becomes a beacon, a symbol of stubborn perseverance against hardship. Godfrey himself has transformed, quietly finding purpose again, not just through endless toil, but through meaningful connection. The forge, once merely a place of labor, now feels alive with quiet purpose. In teaching Thomas and others who slowly join them, Godfrey sees the foundations of something lasting, community reborn from ashes. One quiet evening, as he closes the forge, Godfrey looks out across the village. The lights in homes glow softly. Laughter, though gentle and subdued, echoes softly through the air. He smiles faintly, feeling deeply grateful. Survival, he knows now, is about far more than merely enduring. It is about finding hope, strength, and meaning in even the smallest moments of life. As Godfrey retires to bed, resting easily for the first time in months, one thought lingers warmly, peacefully within his mind. Perhaps this quiet strength, this stubborn hope, was always within us, waiting only for hardship to reveal its power. And you, dear listener, might ask yourself this as sleep softly calls you. Could the mundane, everyday courage of ordinary people like Godfrey and Thomas be the true, quiet heroes of history? Let that thought guide you gently into dreams, reminding you, even in sleep, of the quiet strength hidden in ordinary lives. Imagine, if you will, a small cottage nestled at the edge of a quiet medieval village, blanketed softly by winter's first gentle snowfall. Inside this modest home, in a small, dimly lit room, sits Agnes, a woman who only months earlier would never have imagined she'd find herself alone. Agnes is a widow now. Her husband, Martin, a quiet farmer with kind eyes and a gentle laugh, had succumbed to the plague as summer faded slowly into autumn. She can still vividly recall his final days, memories that haunt her quietly in moments like these, when snow falls silently outside her window and the hearth fire crackles softly, offering little warmth against the chill in her heart. She sits on a simple wooden stool, mending a worn cloak by the dim glow of candlelight. Each careful stitch she makes seems infused with memories of Martin, how he once wore this cloak while repairing fences in biting winds, his breath visible in the crisp air as he laughed softly at their dogs, racing excitedly through frost-covered grass. Agnes pauses for a moment, her fingers gently tracing a frayed edge, lost in quiet reflection. She feels the heaviness of solitude pressing softly upon her, an emptiness as profound as the snowfall blanketing her village. Life has grown strangely silent since Martin's passing, not merely quiet, but devoid of something essential, a presence she'd never fully appreciated until it was gone. Yet, the relentless demands of survival do not allow Agnes the luxury of prolonged grief. Winter, harsh and indifferent, approaches steadily, Already she feels its icy fingers curling around her small cottage, slipping beneath doorways through tiny cracks in walls. Her store of firewood, painstakingly gathered, chopped, and stacked by Martin, is dwindling alarmingly fast. Every piece of wood placed into the fire feels like a loss, another tangible reminder that her husband's strength and warmth are no longer hers to rely upon. As night deepens, Agnes wraps herself tighter in a heavy shawl, her breath visible in the cold, still air of the cottage. She rises slowly, gathering what courage she can muster, stepping cautiously outside into the silent snowfall. The cold bites at her skin instantly, making her shiver despite her layers of clothing. She walks to the woodpile, its dwindling size, a stark reminder of how vulnerable she has become. Carefully, she picks through the remaining logs, selecting just enough to last the night. With every piece she removes, anxiety gnaws quietly at her heart. How will I make it through until spring? She wonders, glancing worriedly toward the distant, shadowy woods beyond her cottage. Woods that promise more firewood, but also hidden dangers, especially for a woman alone. Agnes returns swiftly indoors, locking the door behind her, a small symbolic act against the unknown threats lurking quietly in the darkness. As she feeds logs into the fire, flames leap higher, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with simple shelves bearing sparse supplies. Flour, salt, dried herbs. Her modest provisions feel painfully insufficient. Winter has only just begun, and already fear begins to grip Agnes tighter each night. Sitting again near the hearth, Agnes recalls advice her mother once gave her. When times grow difficult, keep busy, hands moving, mind distracted. So she returns dutifully to her mending, fingers numb with cold but determination still flickering gently within her heart. Each careful stitch feels like a small rebellion against despair, a refusal to surrender entirely to grief and fear. Yet, despite her resolve, Agnes knows she cannot avoid harsh realities. Her small farm lies buried beneath snow, crops withered, animals sold or slaughtered out of necessity. The few remaining villagers, distant neighbors now grown cautious and withdrawn, offer little comfort. They are consumed by their own quiet desperation, each family focused inward, trying desperately to survive winter's unforgiving grip. Agnes wonders briefly if anyone remembers her existence, or even cares. Solitude is not merely loneliness, she realizes. It's invisibility, a quiet erasure from the lives of others. The plague has stripped away community, leaving each survivor isolated, adrift in their own private suffering. She imagines other villagers, perhaps also sitting quietly by dwindling fires, each bearing their own silent grief, each fighting quietly just to stay alive. As hours pass, Agnes's thoughts drift inevitably toward Martin again, memories of their life together offering brief comfort amid sadness. She recalls summer evenings spent quietly beside him, hands gently intertwined beneath starlit skies, spring mornings planting seeds, hopeful for harvests yet to come. Their love was never grand or dramatic. It was quietly steadfast, unspoken yet deeply understood. Now Agnes must face life without that steady presence beside her, forging ahead alone. She thinks softly, almost whispering into the quiet of her cottage. How strange that surviving seems harder than anything else. Outside, snow continues falling gently, blanketing the world softly in silence. Agnes watches through frost-rimmed windows, feeling somehow disconnected from everything beyond her small sanctuary. Tomorrow will come soon enough, bringing challenges and struggles she cannot yet fully anticipate. Tonight she allows herself a moment to simply exist, to remember, to feel. Wrapped tightly in her shawl, Agnes finally lies down on her simple bed, sleep hesitant to claim her. The fire flickers low, shadows dancing gently along walls. She closes her eyes softly, murmuring a quiet prayer, a plea for strength, for courage, for simple survival. Yet as sleep slowly approaches, Agnes can't help but wonder, quietly, achingly, will I truly survive this winter? Or is surviving alone too much to ask? And you, dear listener, as you drift towards sleep, might quietly reflect, How much strength does it take to keep going when loneliness becomes your only companion? Dawn comes gray and slow, seeping into Agnes's cottage with a chill that no fire can fully chase away. She wakes shivering, the cold having crept beneath every blanket. For a moment she lies still, listening. The silence is deep. So deep, in fact, she wonders if the world itself is frozen over in the night. No rooster crows. No children's laughter drifts through the air. Only the faint, steady drip of melting icicles outside marks the passing of time. Agnes sits up, clutching her thin shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her breath rises in pale clouds, catching the weak morning light. She glances at the empty spot beside her bed, the space where Martin once slept, and feels a sharp pang of longing like a cold stone in her chest. "Another day, Martin," she whispers, voice breaking in the stillness. "And I'm still here." Routine is her only defense against despair. She rises and stirs the fire, feeding it the last of yesterday's precious wood. Sparks leap and crackle, filling the room with fleeting warmth and golden light. As the flames steady, Agnes prepares her meager breakfast. A crust of stale bread, softened in weak broth, eaten in silence. Each bite is a struggle between hunger and rationing, the eternal question weighing on her mind. How long until the food runs out? She counts her stores by habit. There's a little flour left, a wedge of hard cheese, and a sack of shriveled apples Martin harvested months ago. Herbs from the summer garden hang in dry bundles above the hearth. A small comfort. Still, she can't ignore the math. Weeks of winter remain, and the food will not last unless she is careful. Her hands are restless. She scrubs the floor, mends another torn garment, and checks for leaks around the windows. Outside, the world is stark white, snow piled high against the door. She must fetch more firewood, but the pile is running low. Agnes feels a pulse of fear. Will she make it to spring? But forces herself to stand and face the cold. Bundling up, she ventures out, boots crunching loudly in the snow. Each step feels heavier than the last, the chill biting through wool and linen. She passes the garden, buried now and lifeless, and glances toward the path leading deeper into the woods. It would be easier, she thinks, if Martin were here. But he is not. She squares her shoulders and presses on, repeating quietly, "Just a little farther, Agnes. You can do this." She gathers what wood she can, arms trembling under the weight. Returning to her cottage, she catches sight of distant smoke curling from another chimney in the village. The sight startles her. For a moment, she almost calls out. A reflex born from years of neighborly comfort. But the air is too empty. She does not know who, if anyone, will answer. Isolation is a strange companion, sometimes reassuring, sometimes suffocating. As the days blur into weeks, hunger becomes Agnes's constant shadow. Her body grows leaner, her movements slower. She dreams of food, thick stews, sweet pies, loaves of fresh bread, but wakes each morning with only a gnawing emptiness inside. Despite this, she clings stubbornly to hope. Just a few more days, she tells herself, marking each one on a scrap of parchment. Just survive a little longer. At night, loneliness presses hardest. Agnes listens for sounds that never come. Martin's steady breathing, his soft footsteps across the floor, his gentle voice humming an old song as he worked. Instead, she hears only the restless wind rattling shutters and the hungry crackle of the fire. She wonders if the other widows, there must be others somewhere, feel this same ache, this hollow in their hearts where love once lived. But there are moments when hope flickers, stubborn and bright. One evening, as the last rays of sun slip away, Agnes hears a faint knocking at her door. Her heart pounds. Is it a neighbor? A friend? Or just the wind? She rises cautiously, wrapping herself tight, and opens the door a crack. On her doorstep stands a young girl no more than 12, bundled in rags and shivering violently. Her cheeks are red with cold, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. For a moment, neither speaks. Then the girl whispers, "Please, miss, may I warm myself by your fire?" Agnes hesitates only a heartbeat before nodding, opening the door. Wider. Come in, child, quickly before you freeze. The girl stumbles in, arms hugging herself, teeth chattering. Agnes leads her to the hearth and helps remove her wet boots, setting them near the fire. For several minutes they sit in silence, listening to the wood crackle, feeling the warmth seep slowly back into frozen limbs. Finally, the girl speaks. My name is Alice, my mother. She's sick. I haven't eaten in 2 days. There's no one left to help us. Agnes feels a sharp pang of empathy, so familiar, so raw. Without thinking, she slices a piece of bread, offering it to Alice, who devours it hungrily. The act is small, but it feels monumental, a reminder that even in the bleakest winter, kindness can still survive. As Alice eats, Agnes listens. The girl tells her a story so much like her own. A home once filled with laughter, now quiet and empty. A mother too weak to fetch food or wood, a heart aching for comfort and safety. Agnes reaches out, gently squeezing Alice's small hand. You'll stay here tonight, she says quietly, and tomorrow we'll find a way to help your mother. We must look after each other now. That night, the cottage feels less empty. 2 breaths rise in the cold air. 2 hearts beat with stubborn hope. Agnes finds herself whispering softly as she drifts towards sleep. Maybe I'm not so alone after all. But as dawn approaches, a new worry takes shape. Food is even scarcer now, and helping Alice's mother will not be easy. Still, Agnes holds on, repeating quietly, we'll survive together. Somehow. And you, gentle listener, as you lie, in your own darkness might ask, does hope truly grow stronger when it's shared even in the hardest winters? Morning breaks pale and uncertain, but Agnes feels something she has not felt in months, a flicker of purpose. Alice sleeps soundly, curled beneath every spare blanket Agnes could find. For the first time in what feels like ages, the cottage is filled with another person's soft, steady breathing. The sound comforts Agnes, as if it holds back the winter's endless silence, if only for a moment. She moves quietly, preparing a thin porridge with the last of her oats. When Alice wakes, Agnes greets her with a gentle smile and a warm bowl. There isn't much, but the girl's gratitude fills the room with a warmth no fire could match. After they eat, Alice's anxious energy returns. She glances often at the door, worry flickering across her young face. My mother will be frightened if I don't come soon, Alice says, wringing her hands. Agnes nods. She cannot send the girl out alone, not through the snow and biting wind. After quickly wrapping themselves in every layer they have, the two step out together, crunching through a world hushed in white. The village seems asleep, its few surviving residents hidden behind shuttered windows. Each footstep feels risky, every cold gust, every distant crow's call, a fresh reminder of how close danger and despair still linger. Alice leads Agnes through winding lanes to a small, crumbling cottage on the edge of the woods. Inside, the air is colder still. A thin woman, her hair streaked with gray, lies on a straw mattress, face drawn and pale with fever. Agnes kneels at her side, offering water and what little bread she has. She stokes the hearth with the wood she carried, on her back, coaxing reluctant flames to life. Gradually, warmth creeps into the room, chasing away a little of the deep chill. As hours pass, Agnes cleans, cooks what she can, and tends gently to Alice's mother. She speaks in soft, reassuring tones, echoing the care Martin once gave her when she was sick. The woman's breathing steadies. Her color improves. Alice clings to Agnes's side, her eyes shining with hope. In the days that follow, Agnes moves between the two cottages, her own and Alice's. She splits her meager food, collects water from the half-frozen stream, and scours the woods for fallen branches, always careful, always watchful. The work is relentless and the hunger sharp, but with each day the three of them grow a little stronger. The kindness Agnes gives is returned in small, unexpected ways. A smile, a whispered thank you, a rough-spun scarf gifted by Alice, clumsily, knitted but warm and full of love. Word begins to spread quietly at first, then with gathering strength. Others in the village, those who remain, those who have kept to themselves out of fear, begin to emerge, drawn by the knowledge that not everyone is lost or alone. One by one, they come to Agnes's door. An old man brings a sack of potatoes. Another woman offers fresh herbs. A neighbor helps mend a leaking roof. Small gestures, but together, they form a lifeline, a fragile web of community reawakening after months of grief and suspicion. Agnes finds herself changed. The emptiness that once filled her cottage and her heart grows less oppressive with each passing day. Grief still lingers. The ache of missing Martin never fully leaves. But now, her days are filled with purpose. She teaches Alice to mend clothing, to bake simple bread. She listens to the quiet stories of her neighbors, remembering that each survivor carries their own winter, their own burden of loss and hope. One night, as snow falls softly outside, Agnes gathers her new friends around the hearth. The fire crackles, filling the small room with golden light. Alice's mother, much recovered now, tells a story of summer gardens and laughter. Others share tales, some sorrowful, some joyful, all real. For the first time in months, the cottage is filled with the music of human voices, the fragile but persistent sound of life continuing. Agnes sits quietly, watching the flames dance, listening to laughter rise and fall. She closes her eyes, feeling tears prick gently. They are not tears of despair this time, but of gratitude. She remembers Martin, not with pain, but with warmth. He would have been proud, she thinks, of what she has done, not merely surviving, but helping others find hope in the deepest winter. As the season slowly turns, the days grow a little longer, the snow a little less relentless. Small green shoots appear where the earth softens, and birdsong returns, hesitant at first, then brighter each morning. Agnes plants her garden again, with Alice's help and her neighbors' gifts. She knows spring will not erase all sorrow, but it will bring new life and new chances. One evening, standing in her doorway, Agnes watches the village settle in for the night. Lights flicker in windows up and down the lane. She feels the weight of winter's long darkness lifting, replaced by something gentler, an understanding that even the coldest nights can be survived, if people hold each other up. She whispers, almost to herself but also to the sleeping world around her, "We endured, together." And you, gentle listener, as you drift toward sleep, might ponder, is survival really just endurance? Or is it the courage to reach for another's hand, even when your own heart is breaking? In the end, perhaps, it is the quiet kindnesses, shared bread, a fire in the dark, a gentle word, that keep us all alive. Picture a small ancient chapel on the edge of a plague-scarred village. Its stones are dark with age, the roof patched with whatever the villagers could find, the bell in the tower silent for weeks now. Each morning, as mist drifts across the quiet churchyard, Father Edmund steps softly from his cell-like room, wrapped in a woolen cloak that smells of incense and old wax. His footsteps echo on cold flagstones as he enters the chapel, now a hollow shell of its former self. Once pews were filled with villagers, old men nodding off in the warmth, children whispering and giggling, mothers swaying babies on their laps while the scent of baking bread drifted in from the square. Now, more than half the pews are empty. The faces that remain are gaunt, eyes wide and wary. Fear is the only thing everyone seems to share. Father Edmund stands at the altar, arranging the tarnished chalice, smoothing the cloth, lighting the stub of a candle. He begins each day the same way, a whispered prayer for protection, for comfort, for deliverance. His voice is thin in the stillness, sometimes breaking as he names the sick and the dead. The roll of names grows longer every week. Some names are uttered twice, first in hope, then in farewell. He remembers the first funeral after the plague arrived, how hurried it was, how few mourners came. They'd buried the body at dawn, almost afraid of drawing the plague's attention. Since then, burials have been quiet, private affairs. Edmund, though trembling, always stands graveside, offering a prayer, a blessing, a final comfort. Sometimes, he is the only one to say goodbye. But it isn't just the burials that wear him down. It's the weight of grief he carries for others. The confessions, spoken from behind doors, through shutters, over garden fences, are different now. People whisper of anger, of doubt, of envy at those who've been spared. Some simply ask, why? Their questions hang in the air, unanswered. Father, Edmund has no answers. He only has his rituals, the rhythm of prayer, candle, and bell. He tells himself the rituals matter, that his presence, however small, offers some anchor for the souls adrift around him. Still, he sometimes wonders alone at night whether his faith is enough. His own body aches with exhaustion. The constant, tending to the sick, the washing, the feeding, the prayers offered as fevered hands clutch at his robe, has left him thin and worn. He fears for his own life, of course, but more for what will become of the village if he too should fall. The priest's house is as cold and spare as a monk's cell. Each night, he sits beside a guttering candle, reading from a battered psalter, until his eyes blur. Outside, the village has shrunk. Fewer lights burn each night. A dog barks far off, and sometimes Edmund imagines he hears weeping carried on the wind. He tries to visit the families who remain, bringing what comfort he can. A prayer, a loaf of bread, a gentle touch. Children cling to their mothers, staring at him with solemn, haunted eyes. Edmund finds himself repeating the same words, over and over. You are not alone. God is with you. But in his heart, he feels lonelier with each passing day. Sometimes, he catches himself resenting those who have left, those who fled to distant relatives or simply vanished. He cannot leave. He is bound to his flock by sacred duty, by conscience, by a promise made long ago to a different congregation, a different Gerter. The vows he took, poverty, obedience, service, feel heavier than ever. There are moments, though, when hope stirs. A widow leaves a basket of apples on the chapel steps. A shy boy offers a drawing. For you, Father. A new baby's cry echoes one morning from a nearby cottage, a small miracle. These gifts, humble and fleeting, kindle something inside him, something that refuses to die. One evening, as a bitter wind rattles the chapel windows, Edmund kneels in the sanctuary, praying for guidance. His voice falters, tears slipping down his cheeks. Lord, show me how to keep going. I am so tired, so afraid. The candle beside him gutters, threatening to go out. He listens, waiting for an answer in the silence. None comes, not tonight. But as the flame steadies, a stubborn defiance rises in him. He wipes his face, stands, and looks out into the shadowed nave. There are still people who need him. There is still bread to bake, comfort to give, names to remember. If faith is only ritual, only habit, then let it be so, for even habit can be a lifeline in the dark. As he closes the chapel doors, Edmund glances up at the sky, now clearing, stars flickering above the rooftops. He wonders, can hope survive in the emptiest places? And you, gentle listener, as you rest in your own quiet room, might ponder, what keeps a soul going when the world grows silent, and faith itself feels cold and distant? Morning arrives thin and gray, filtering through the chapel's high windows. Father Edmund wakes before dawn as always and pulls on his worn robe, stiff with candle wax and the faint scent of lavender, remnants of a time when the altar was regularly adorned with flowers. He finds himself moving more slowly these days, careful with every step, as though the floor itself might crumble beneath him if he rushes. He sits quietly at the altar, listening to the silence that presses in on every side. The village outside is barely stirring. Even the crows, once a raucous choir above the rooftops, seem subdued. Edmund lights a single candle, its small flame shivering against the draught, and begins his morning prayer. He prays for the sick, for the hungry, for the children whose laughter has vanished from the lanes. He prays for those who have left and those who have stayed. Sometimes he prays for himself, though these prayers are softer, almost apologetic, as if he fears he has no right to seek comfort. But this morning a peculiar feeling settles on him, a faint sense of companionship with the generations of priests who came before, each one rising before dawn, speaking words of hope into empty, uncertain days. After prayers, Edmund checks on the supplies stored in the church vestry: a dwindling sack of barley, 2 loaves of coarse bread, a little salt, a jug of watered wine. He parcels out what he can spare. Later, he will bring these to the families who need them most. The walk through the village is always heavy. So many doors closed, so many windows dark. When he does encounter a neighbor, they greet each other, with wary eyes, nodding quietly, sharing in their mutual loss. Today, he visits the Potter family first. The mother is thin and exhausted, tending 3 children who no longer ask to play. She meets him at the door, arms folded tightly around herself. Edmund offers her a loaf of bread and asks after her husband, who has been ill for days. She shakes her head, lips pressed tight, and Edmund bows his own, whispering a prayer. He cannot linger. Fear hangs thick in the air, and everyone keeps their distance. As he makes his rounds, he exchanges small words with the people he meets, simple questions, gentle reassurances. An elderly man needs his door repaired. A young woman asks for herbs to help her sleep. Edmund helps where he can, his own hands clumsy with tasks that once belonged to others. He mends, he listens, he comforts, often with nothing more than his presence. Back at the chapel, Edmund spends his afternoons writing letters. Some are addressed to neighboring parishes, pleading for supplies or for anyone to come help. Others are letters he will never send, confessions, reflections, quiet, outpourings of doubt and gratitude. He leaves these on his desk, a secret testament to his loneliness. Evenings are the hardest. As dusk falls, the shadows in the chapel grow long and deep. Edmund lights every candle he can find, flooding the space with trembling light. He sits at the organ, playing old hymns for an audience of empty pews. The music fills the air with memories, weddings, baptisms, festival days when the whole village gathered together in joy. Now his voice cracks as he sings alone, but still he sings. Sometimes villagers gather outside, standing at a careful distance, listening through the chapel's open doors. For a few brief moments, the music bridges the gap between them. Edmund watches from the corner of his eye, taking comfort in their presence, however fleeting. Afterward, he stands at the door, blessing each person as they drift away into the night. A mother thanks him for the bread. A boy presses a wilted flower into his hand. For a few minutes, the chapel glows with something almost like hope. Yet when everyone is gone and the candles gutter, Edmund is left once more with silence. He kneels at the altar, head bowed, heart heavy. He wonders, not for the first time, whether any of it makes a difference. "Am I truly helping them, Lord?" he whispers into the shadows. "Or am I just holding back the dark for one more night? Sleep comes slowly." Sometimes he dreams of the chapel filled with light and laughter, dreams so vivid he wakes disoriented, reaching for a world that no longer exists. Other times, he dreams of wandering the lanes, searching for faces he cannot find. Yet, in the midst of this uncertainty, Edmund holds on to his rituals, to the rhythm of service. The small acts, carrying bread, saying prayers, sharing music, become his anchor. Even when faith falters, duty remains. As another night deepens, Edmund places his last candle on the windowsill, letting its glow spill into the darkness beyond. He sits quietly, watching, wondering if somewhere someone finds comfort in its small, stubborn light. And you, gentle listener, might find yourself asking, when the world grows cold and empty, can the simple act of being present, of witnessing, of caring be enough to keep hope alive? Winter lingers, stubborn and raw, as Father Edmund moves through his days with a slow, deliberate purpose. Each sunrise finds him waking in the cold hush of the chapel, feeling the weight of silence settle over his shoulders like an old, familiar garment. Yet, beneath the heaviness, a fragile thread of hope persists, sometimes barely felt, but always there, woven through the daily rituals that define his existence. Edmund's life has shrunk to the essentials: prayer, tending to the sick, distributing bread, offering solace. His body is thinner, his face more lined, but his eyes, though weary, are clear. Each day he makes his rounds through the village, nodding to those few who remain, carrying what little he can offer in a battered wicker basket. His presence is steady, even when his faith feels brittle. He notices small changes. A baby's laughter drifting out a cottage window. A patch of snowdrops blooming shyly near the chapel steps. The blacksmith, long silent, now hammering gently at his anvil, repairing the tools and hinges that hold the village together. Even the air seems different, less sharp, more forgiving. Edmund pauses often, quietly grateful for these ordinary miracles. One afternoon, as he sits at the altar organizing his tattered prayer book, the chapel doors creak open. It is Clara, a young widow with 2 children, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She steps forward, hands trembling as she speaks. "Father, could you come bless our home? The children," she falters, tears bright in her eyes. "They're so frightened. I am too." Edmund stands, his movement gentle. He follows Clara through the lanes, past empty houses and shuttered windows. Her children cling to her skirt, their faces pale, but their eyes widen with cautious hope as Edmund enters. He sprinkles water over their beds, murmuring blessings. He places a hand on each head, his voice steady and low. "You are not alone. You are loved." He stays a while, listening to Clara speak of her fears, the ache of loneliness, the hunger that gnaws at her courage, the constant worry that tomorrow might bring only loss. Edmund offers what comfort he can. Words, prayers, the simple act of listening without judgment. When he leaves, Clara's grip on his hand is tight, desperate and grateful. "Thank you, Father," she whispers. "You helped us remember what kindness feels like." As Edmund returns to the chapel, dusk gathers. He sits in a pew, gazing at the stained glass windows, colors blurred and softened by fading light. He finds himself praying not just for the village but for himself, for strength to keep moving, for grace to forgive his own doubts. That evening, the chapel doors open one by one. People slip inside, hesitant at first, then in growing numbers. They bring what little they have: an onion, a handful of dried herbs, a story, a song. They light candles, each flame a silent prayer for the living and the lost. The air grows, warmer, the silence broken by quiet conversation, soft laughter, even gentle tears. Father Edmund stands before them, voice trembling as he begins the old litany. He speaks not of miracles or swift salvation, but of endurance, of finding faith in ordinary acts, of drawing strength from one another, of choosing hope even when the world offers only uncertainty. After the service, the villagers linger. Some share bread, others exchange news. A boy hands Edmund a crudely carved wooden cross, a gift made with clumsy, loving hands. "For you, Father," the boy says, "so you don't forget us." Edmund smiles, a true, weary smile. He feels his burdens lighten just a little. For the first time in a long while, the chapel feels alive, a place not just of mourning but of community. He realizes, as he looks at the faces around him, that his lonely vigil was never truly solitary. Grief and hope, faith and doubt, they have always been shared. As night deepens, the candles flicker, one by one, until only a single flame remains on the altar. Edmund stands quietly in the golden glow, offering a final benediction to the emptying chapel. "Go in peace," he whispers, voice barely more than a breath, "and let kindness guide you through the darkness." He lingers in the silence after, letting the comfort of community settle within him. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, more grief, more uncertainty, but also perhaps more small moments of grace. Outside, the stars emerge, sharp and cold, but beautiful. Edmund stands in the doorway looking up, his heart filled with a quiet, stubborn hope. He has learned that even the loneliest vigil is not endured alone. And you, gentle listener, as you drift toward sleep, might ask yourself, what strength can be found in simply being present day after day when hope is all that remains? Perhaps in the end it is the quiet persistence of care, the decision to remain, to witness, to comfort, that shapes the history of even the smallest village. Imagine, if you will, the edge of a busy, battered town deep in the heart of the plague years. Narrow cobbled lanes lined with houses shuttered against fear. At dawn, under a sky gray with smoke and mist, the only figure moving is that of Master Paulus, the plague doctor, as he prepares for another day of work that no one envies, few understand, and most would rather forget. His day always begins the same way. Paulus rises from a thin straw mattress, shoulders already aching, and washes his hands in a cold basin, scrubbing with vinegar as a feeble defense against the invisible enemy. He eats a stale crust of bread, chews a few sprigs of bitter herbs, and dons his infamous attire, the heavy waxed robe, the broad-brimmed hat, gloves, boots, and finally, the long-nosed mask stuffed with strong-smelling herbs and spices. The mask is cumbersome and stifling, but it offers some sense of safety, however illusory. Before leaving, he glances in the small, clouded mirror, hardly recognizing the eyes staring back. Sometimes he wonders if he will ever remove the mask again and be just Paulus the man, not the harbinger of dread who makes children run and mothers weep in his wake. He steps outside. The silence of the streets is broken only by the caw of a raven on a rooftop, the distant toll of a bell marking another death. Paulus walks briskly, his black cloak rustling as he checks the day's list, names and addresses left at his door by desperate hands overnight. Most requests are scrawled in trembling script. Please come, fever grows worse, or my son is coughing blood. Some are just a name, a plea, nothing more. His first stop is a modest home near the center of town. The air inside is heavy with the scent of illness and fear. A woman sits beside a low pallet where her husband sweats and shivers. Paulus kneels, his gloved hands moving swiftly, checking for signs of the telltale buboes, noting the dark stains spreading across skin, asking quiet questions in a voice muffled by his mask. He leaves a vial of rose water, a bundle of dried sage, instructions for cooling fevers. His advice, though earnest, feels painfully inadequate. He can offer comfort, but not a cure. Outside, he marks a tally in his ledger, the ink trembling slightly from the cold. On to the next house, and the next. All day, Paulus moves from door to door, sometimes welcomed with desperate hope, sometimes with suspicion or outright hostility. Children hide behind skirts, men avert their eyes. In the rare moments when a patient recovers, there is no celebration, only a cautious gratitude, a hope that the respite will last. The tasks never end. He inspects the dying, records the dead, issues certificates, and orders for the burning of linens and the cleaning of streets with vinegar and smoke. He trains helpers in how to handle bodies, offers advice on digging graves. The work is both vital and thankless. No one dares get too close. His assistants are few and often vanish without warning, terrified by the risks or loss to the very sickness they battle. Paulus is paid little, sometimes only in stale bread, eggs, or a promise scrawled on paper that will never be redeemed. The end of each day, he returns home and burns his gloves and mask in a small brazier, watches the flames consume the only barrier between himself and the world's grief. Yet, for all the fatigue and danger, Paulus is haunted not just by fear, but by helplessness. He can offer neither true protection nor sure salvation. The old remedies, bleeding, poultices, strange infusions, rarely help, and he knows it. Most nights he lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant howls of dogs and the sobbing that echoes through the streets. He wonders, am I truly helping, or am I just another witness to so much suffering? Still, each morning he wakes and dons the mask again, not because he believes he can conquer the plague, but because there are hands reaching for help, voices calling in the darkness, and as long as he can walk, he will answer. So, as dusk gathers, Master Paulus sits by a flickering candle, writing careful notes about each patient, each home, each fading hope. He does not allow himself to stop, not for long. The next day will bring more knocks at his door, more cries in the night, more endless chores that, in their quiet way, hold a community together. And you, gentle listener, as you slip into your own quiet night, might ask, what keeps a person going when each day is an endless cycle of dread and duty? Is it hope, habit, or something deeper? A stubborn refusal to abandon those who need you, even when the world seems beyond saving? The mornings blur together for Master Paulus, every day beginning almost the same way, a dim gray sky peering through his cracked window, a chill in the room that never quite lifts, and the faint ache in his bones reminding him that time, too, is a disease. He rises before dawn, wraps himself in his heavy robe, and spends a moment in silence before the crucifix on the wall, lips moving in a prayer for strength. Each morning, his prayers are brief, but honest. Let me not bring harm. Let me bear. Witness, let me endure. Sometimes the words come out as a whisper. Other days they barely rise above a breath. The townsfolk seldom see Paulus's face. To them he is the mask, the silhouette, the shuffling figure in black moving through the waking mists. But inside, beneath the beaked mask, he is simply a man who never dreamed his life would come to this, counting the living and the dead, his ledger as full of sorrow as of science. His days are ruled by the careful routines he has forced upon himself, each a small act of hope, a bulwark against chaos. He keeps a schedule, certain streets in the morning, the riverside quarter after midday, the outskirts before dusk. At each stop, he disinfects his hands, his boots, the clasp of his bag, dipping them in vinegar, or wiping them down with bundles of lavender and rosemary. It's not that Paulus believes these rituals can truly keep him safe. He knows well enough from the stories of physicians in Florence, in Avignon, in London, that no barrier is truly strong enough. But it's the act itself that comforts him, the sense of doing something, anything against the invisible foe. Some days he is accompanied by Hans, a stout apprentice barely 16. Hans is eager, sometimes overly so, but his presence is a comfort Paulus rarely admits. Together, they move through the foggy lanes, Hans lugging bundles of linens and a bucket of lye, Paulus with his bag of dried herbs, glass vials, and a journal stuffed with observations. The beaked mask, with its sharp profile and eye holes, both, frightens and fascinates the children who catch glimpses of it between shutters. Paulus sometimes hears them whispering, ghost stories most likely, about the doctor who smells of cloves and vinegar, who arrives when someone is very, very sick. Today, they visit the River District, a cluster of shacks and muddy alleys where illness clings like a second skin. The first house is little more than a hovel. A woman answers the door, her eyes hollow but hopeful. "Doctor, please, my father's breathing is bad." Paulus steps inside, the air so thick with the stench of sickness that even his mask's pungent bouquet barely covers it. He kneels by the old man, whose skin is sallow and whose breath rattles like gravel in his throat. Paulus checks his pulse, lifts his eyelids, murmurs words of reassurance he's uttered 100 times before. He prescribes a poultice of crushed garlic and vinegar, leaves a sachet of camphor, and instructs the woman to wash the bedding daily, though he knows she will struggle to find clean water. He shows Hans how to make a simple steam by boiling rosemary and sage, encouraging the old man to inhale deeply. It is not a cure, but perhaps it will ease the suffering, if only a little. Outside, Hans lingers by the door, his young face pale beneath his scarf. "Will he die, master?" he asks in a whisper. Paulus hesitates, choosing his words with care. "Perhaps, but we make him more comfortable. That too is a kind of help." He wonders, not for the first time, if he is trying to comfort the patient or himself. They visit 5 more homes before noon. In one, a mother's fever has broken, and she weeps when Paulus arrives, clutching his gloved hand and thanking him as if he's brought her back from death itself. In another, he finds a child already gone, her father numb with shock. Paulus kneels quietly, says a short prayer, and helps Hans wrap the small body in a linen sheet for burial. There is no time for tears. There is always another home, another call. Their tools are as much ritual as remedy. Leeches, used sparingly now, sit in a jar by the window, vials of vinegar and rosewater, sachets of dried marigold, thought to ward off corrupted air, coins boiled before payment then wrapped in cloth. Each action is careful, deliberate, a choreography learned by heart. Hans cleans instruments with a shaky diligence, scrubbing until his fingers are red and raw. Paulus, meanwhile, records everything. The pattern of symptoms, the days between illness and death, any sign of recovery. His journal is dense with observation, notes for the future in case some new pattern, some elusive secret, might emerge. After midday, Paulus and Hans rest beneath a stone archway, sharing a small meal of bread and onions. Hans asks about the mask, why it must be so long, so strange. Paulus removes it just for a moment to eat. His face is gaunt, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. It's meant to keep the bad air away. Herbs and spices, they say, cleanse the breath before it reaches the lungs. He half smiles, weary. It is as much for their comfort as for mine. People trust in rituals when nothing else makes sense. Hans nods, thoughtful. Do you think it works? Paulus's answer is quiet, honest, I do not know, but it helps us try. After their meal, they resume their rounds, visiting the baker's house where the matron has taken to hanging garlic and wormwood from every beam. It wards off the plague, she insists, pressing a loaf of bread into Paulus's hands as payment. He thanks her, offers advice on boiling water, and leaves her with a recipe for a syrup of honey and vinegar, said to soothe a cough. As dusk draws near, the streets take on a haunted quiet. Paulus and Hans pause by the square, watching as two laborers, masked, faces hidden, carry a shrouded form toward the graveyard. A small crowd gathers at a distance, heads bowed. Paulus feels their eyes on him, a strange mixture of gratitude and dread. He and Hans return to Paulus's small home, where Paulus instructs his apprentice in the evening rituals. Masks and gloves are burned in the brazier, clothes left outside to air, hands scrubbed raw with soap and ash. The day's notes are copied carefully into the ledger, and the next day's rounds are planned, lists of homes and patients, remedies to prepare. Hans lingers by the door, uncertain. Do you ever wish you had chosen something else, master? He asks softly. Paulus is quiet for a long moment, watching the last rays of light slip away. Sometimes, but I remember my teacher in Padua, who stayed when others ran. We do what we can for as long as we can, even if it is not enough, even if no one thanks us. Night falls. Paulus sits by the fire, the mask and robe set aside. The flames flicker, casting shadows across the walls. He writes a letter to a fellow doctor in a distant town, describing a new rash he's observed, the remedies he's tried, the patterns he suspects. He closes the letter with a simple line: May your courage outlast your fear. Before bed, Paulus walks outside for a moment, gazing up at the sky, stars struggling to pierce the haze. He feels tired to his soul, yet oddly peaceful. Tomorrow will bring more chores, more sorrow, more chances to help or fail. But tonight, he lets himself rest, comforted, perhaps, by the knowledge that persistence is its own kind of remedy. He wonders quietly, as sleep draws near, what is the value of work that seems endless, thankless, and often hopeless? Is there dignity simply in trying, in returning again and again no matter the outcome? And you, dear listener, might find yourself drifting with the same question. In a world full of suffering and uncertainty, is it enough just to keep showing up, to keep caring, to keep hope alive, however small the flame? Night falls softly over the town, but for Master Paulus, rest is a fragile, fleeting thing. He sits at his small wooden table, journal open before him, lamplight flickering across lines dense with names, symptoms, notes, and unanswered questions. Outside, the square is silent, save for the distant clatter of a wagon, another body being taken to the graveyard. The world beyond his window feels impossibly large and impossibly empty. Despite his exhaustion, Paulus cannot bring himself to close his eyes. There are remedies to mix for tomorrow, bandages to wash, and more grim news to record. Hans sleeps in the next room, his breathing a soft reassurance that, for tonight at least, Paulus is not entirely alone. Still, the hours feel longer now, the shadows deeper, the ache of solitude settling in with the cold. He finds himself reflecting on the weeks, now months, that have passed in this rhythm of relentless work. His hands, once precise and steady, bear new scars. His eyes, once sharp, now strain in the dim light, and yet he sees more clearly than ever the thin line between hope and despair. He wonders what stories will be told of this time and whether anyone will remember the small, stubborn acts that filled each day. For all the suffering, there are moments that linger. A father recovering, who sends Paulus a basket of apples, in thanks. A child who draws a clumsy picture of the bird doctor and leaves it at his door. An old woman who grips his hand, tears streaming down her face, and simply says, "You stayed." These, Paulus realizes, are the quiet victories, unseen by the world, but lasting in their own way. In the morning, he and Hans resume their rounds. The town feels changed, less fearful but not less cautious. Some survivors, drawn from their homes by necessity, move through the streets with wary eyes and careful steps. Others come to Paulus with questions about recovery. Will the coughing come back? When will it be safe to visit my sister? Is it true the air is finally clean? Paulus answers as best he can, always honest, always gentle, never making promises he cannot keep. He spends his afternoons tending the growing number of survivors. Some are weak and need help to stand. Others fear every ache, every spot or shiver. Paulus listens with patience, teaching Hans how to check wounds, boil water, and brew weak teas for comfort. He encourages the families to share what little they have: warm broth, clean cloth, fresh air from an open window. The townsfolk begin slowly to lean on one another again. Still, there are losses each day. A familiar face missing from the baker's queue. A closed window where music once drifted into the street. At each new grave, Paulus offers a silent prayer, his words no longer seeking miracles but instead asking for simple peace. One afternoon, he is called to the edge of town, where a group of survivors tend a garden. Thin rows of cabbage and leeks, small, determined green shoots breaking the earth. Paulus kneels beside an old friend, Jan, who survived the fever but cannot walk as he once did. They speak quietly, sharing news of the town, memories of days before the plague. Jan looks at Paulus, eyes tired but clear. "You kept us together, Paulus. Even when you could not heal us, you did not turn away. That matters." Paulus feels the truth of it settle in his chest, a weight, but also a strange relief. He did not save everyone. He could not even save most. But he bore witness. He remained present, refusing to abandon those in need, even when hope was thin as smoke. Back at home, Paulus finds a letter slipped under his door. It is from a woman whose husband he tended, whose recovery was slow but sure. The note is simple. "We remember your kindness. When you walked through our door, we knew we had not been forgotten." As summer returns, the rhythm of the town begins to shift. Windows are opened again. Children's laughter, tentative but real, returns to the alleys. Merchants call out from carts, and families gather in the square for the first time in months. Paulus moves among them, mask and robe gone now in the warmth, though he carries the memory of them always. Hans, now more confident, continues to learn, eager to help and eager, too, for life beyond plague and fear. Paulus teaches him not only the herbs and poultices, but the value of listening, of gentleness, of bearing the burdens of others with patience. Sometimes Paulus is asked if he ever grew afraid. He answers honestly, "Every day." But fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you understand what is at stake and that you care. His words become a lesson, one Hans and others carry forward. With each passing week, the plague's grip loosens. The wounds of the community will take time to heal, but Paulus has learned something quiet and profound. Healing is not always a matter of cure. Sometimes it is presence. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let sorrow have the final word. On a late summer evening, as dusk settles over the square, Paulus stands by his door, listening to the mingled voices, the ordinary music of a town, slowly remembering how to live. He closes his eyes, breathes in the scent of herbs, bread, and life. He is for a moment at peace. He wonders as the stars prick the sky. What does it mean to endure, not just the disease, but the work, the waiting, the endless, unseen kindnesses? Is it the hope of reward, or the stubborn certainty that showing up again and again makes all the difference in the world? And you, gentle listener, as sleep claims you, might consider. In times of fear and hardship, is the greatest legacy not heroic cures or dramatic rescues, but the simple, unwavering act of caring, day after day until dawn returns? It is early, morning in the heart of the medieval countryside, and the world is shrouded in mist, pale and damp, seeping into everything. Before the first hint of sunlight breaks over the horizon, you awaken, stiff from a night spent on a straw-filled mattress. That's never quite soft enough. You are Tomas, a peasant farmer, one of dozens in your tiny hamlet, tucked between patchwork fields and the edge of an ancient wood. The day begins not with leisure or hope, but with habit and necessity. The roof above you leaks in 3 places, and the hearth's embers have gone out overnight, leaving the air in your cottage sharp with cold. Your first act is practical, pulling a patched tunic over your head, slipping cracked boots onto sore feet, and stumbling out into the yard, your breath visible in the chilly dawn. The land you farm is not your own. It belongs to Lord Oswald, whose manor sits atop a distant hill, watching over the village like an indifferent god. You pay him with grain, eggs, and whatever coin you can scrape together after the worst years anyone can remember, the years when the plague came, and the village vanished almost without a sound. You still see their faces sometimes, hear their laughter echoing in the empty lanes. Now only silence answers back. Your days are measured not by hours, but by chores. Tedious, unending, utterly necessary. Before you break your fast, you check the animals. The single cow, thin and irritable, must be milked. The hens cluck resentfully as you gather a handful of eggs. A stray cat curls by the door, waiting for scraps. Nothing is wasted. Every crumb, every drop of milk, every handful of feed is accounted for. Inside, your wife, Magda, moves about with quiet efficiency, already kneading the week's bread. The children, silent and still half asleep, huddle close to the hearth. Their faces are pinched, half with hunger, half with worry. The stores have run low this winter, dried beans, salted pork, the last of the onions. You wonder not for the first time how you'll stretch these meager supplies until spring. You eat a simple meal, hard bread dipped in thin broth, while Magda gently urges the children to eat slowly, to make it last. You speak little, conversation. Having grown thin with hardship, afterward you step outside, tools in hand, ready to meet the work awaiting you. The fields, once rich and full of promise, lie half fallow. Heavy rains have turned the paths into sucking mud, and you curse under your breath as your boots stick with every step. The wheat you planted last autumn has struggled, patchy and weak, the stalks battered by frost and neglect. You know you must replant, but there is no seed to spare. The Lord's tithe comes first, and you fear this year there may not be enough for your own table. Plowing is slow, the old ox groaning in protest with each pass. You coax him gently, whispering the same words you used as a child when your father first taught you the rhythms of the land. The work is monotonous, the kind that dulls the mind but spares you for a while from the ache of loss. Your hands blister then bleed, but you press on hour after hour, because the land is both enemy and salvation. At midday you pause, wiping sweat from your brow, and glance across the fields. Smoke rises from the blacksmith's forge, the only sign of life besides your own. Birds call from the hedgerows, their songs a bittersweet reminder of seasons past, before the fields grew so empty, before every day was shadowed by the threat of hunger or sickness. Sometimes you envy the birds, their freedom to come and go, their simple needs. You wonder if they remember, as you do, the laughter that once filled the air. Magda appears at the edge of the field, waving you in for a midday meal. You eat quickly, more bread, a cup of watery ale, a piece of last year's cheese. She presses your hand before you leave, a gesture more comforting than any words. "We will make it through," she murmurs, her voice as steady as ever. You nod, uncertain but grateful for her faith. The afternoon is spent mending fences, patching the leaking roof, and hauling wood for the fire. Each task is small, but together they fill the day. Your body aches with fatigue, but you do not stop. If you rest, the world seems to pause with you, and the emptiness threatens to swallow everything. As dusk falls, you gather the family for evening prayers. Your youngest clutches your hand tightly, eyes wide in the firelight. You thank God for what little you have, for the strength to endure another day. In the quiet that follows, you listen to the wind against the walls and the soft breathing of your children. Sleep comes slowly. You lie awake, staring at the thatch above, counting the things you cannot change. The harvest that failed, the friends you lost, the Lord's unending demands. Yet, beneath it all, there is something stubborn inside you, a will that refuses to give up. You wonder as you drift into a restless sleep, is survival simply a matter of work? Or is it the quiet decision to keep waking up, day after day, no matter what the fields may yield? And you, gentle listener, might ask yourself, how many lives, how many forgotten struggles are buried in the quiet labor of ordinary people? What silent strength does it take to endure when hope is as thin as broth and as fleeting as birdsong? The second day breaks cold and gray, but you rise as always, driven by need and habit. The world is soft with mist, dew clinging to every blade of grass, and your breath clouds the early air. You move stiffly, feeling every ache from yesterday's labor, but you have no choice. There are mouths to feed, fences to mend, and another day's work waiting for you like a silent command. Magda greets you with a tired smile, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed with worry but shining with that persistent strength you have come to depend on. The children are quiet at breakfast, chewing slowly, savoring every crumb. You all know without speaking that the stores are lower than ever. You step outside, boots squelching in the muddy path. The fields look the same as they did yesterday, and the day before that, yet each morning brings fresh anxieties. The frost is receding but slowly, too slowly for your liking. You kneel and run your hands through the dark earth, feeling its chill seep into your skin. You whisper a quiet hope that this year will be different, that the seeds you plant now will sprout, that rain will come when it's needed and not drown the roots. You start the day by repairing a broken section of fence, cursing softly under your breath as you wrestle with the ancient knotted wood. The ox looks on, blinking patiently, and the hens scold you from their pen. The cat waits, expectant, as you scatter a handful of crumbs. Even the smallest rituals seem important now, anchors in a world that keeps changing around you. Later, you walk the fields with Magda, planning where to plant beans and barley, marking rows with a sharpened stick. She points out the first green shoots of wild garlic near the edge of the wood, and together you gather a bundle, glad for the flavor it will bring to your thin stews. For a moment, the small victory lifts your spirits. By midday, the sun is strong, enough to warm your shoulders as you work, and you allow yourself to imagine a good harvest just for a moment. You remember how in better years the fields rippled with wheat, and there was enough to share. A neighbor's loaf left on your doorstep, a cup of ale raised in laughter. You try not to dwell on all that's been lost, but the memories hover at the edge of your mind like ghosts you cannot banish. A distant bell rings, the sound from the manor calling the reeve and a handful of men to the Lord's fields. You glance at Magda, her jaw set, and you both know what this means. Another demand, another tithe, another reminder that the land is never truly yours. You trudge up the lane with the others, joining a silent, stoic procession. The Lord's steward, tall and thin, inspects the work, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He notes the size of the tithe, the sacks of grain set aside, the state of the tools and the fences. When he looks at you, you lower your gaze, knowing that complaints only bring punishment or extra labor. Still, as the afternoon wears on, you find comfort in the company of your neighbors. Together you patch a crumbling wall, share a joke or two, grumble about the steward's cold demands. Misery, you realize, is lighter when carried together. The sun dips lower. You return to your cottage, shoulders aching, hands stained with soil and splinters. Magda is waiting with a pot of stew, thin but savory with wild garlic, and the children eat eagerly. You watch them, heart tight with both pride and anxiety. Every empty bowl, every satisfied sigh, is a victory over hunger, even if you know tomorrow's struggle will be the same. After dinner, you and Magda sit outside, watching the twilight settle. She leans her head on your shoulder, and for a while you share the silence, drawing strength from one another. You talk quietly of the future, the beans you'll plant, the hopes you carry, the fear you both feel but rarely name. She squeezes your hand, her touch a promise. We endure. That's what we do. But the night brings its own burdens. In the darkness, you hear a knock at your door. Your heart leaps. Such visits rarely bring good news. It's your neighbor Gert, his face drawn, eyes red. He tells you that his eldest son, only 12, is sick with fever. He asks if you have any willow bark left, anything that might ease the pain. You give what you can. As Gert thanks you and disappears into the night, you close the door and sit in silence. The reality of village life presses in, the thin line between survival and loss, the fragility of every joy. You check on your children as they sleep, their faces soft in the firelight. You whisper a prayer for their health, for Magda's strength for another day's endurance. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the shutters, and you lie awake, listening, wondering how many more winters you will see, how many more friends you will lose. But in that darkness, you also feel a stubborn thread of hope, a belief, however faint, that your quiet efforts matter, that every fence you mend, every bean you plant, every kindness you share, is an act of defiance against despair. As you finally drift toward sleep, your thoughts linger on the question that shadows every day. Is life measured in harvests, or in the small, hard-won triumphs of each day? And you, gentle listener, may find yourself wondering, what hidden strength lies in the routines of ordinary people? What quiet courage, what dignity, what legacy? Spring creeps in on a tide of mud and hesitant green, and you, Thomas, feel the change before you see it. The air softer on your skin, the mornings tinged with birdsong instead of silence. The worst of the hunger has passed, if only just. There is a steady ache in your bones, but with it, a flicker of hope that grows a little brighter with each day of thawing ground and lengthening light. You wake before dawn, as always. But for the first time in months, the prospect of stepping outside does not fill you with dread. Instead, there's a restless anticipation, a sense that perhaps this year, the land might reward your labor, that the gods or fate or simple fortune may finally be turning in your favor. Magda is already at the hearth, coaxing a small fire to life, her hair illuminated by the gold of early sunlight. The children rise without complaint, sensing the shift in the season, their voices tentative but more lively than you remember. Even the cow seems less irritable, flicking her tail as you approach with a bucket, her eyes meeting yours with a familiar, patient look. Breakfast is simple but more satisfying. A heel of bread softened with the last of the broth, a fresh egg for each child, a sprinkle of wild garlic that brings the promise of new growth into your humble home. You eat in near silence, not because there is nothing to say, but because the relief is too new, too delicate to disturb with words. The day's labor is endless, but different now. The frost has left the ground, and the earth turns easily beneath your spade. The children help in the garden, scattering seeds under Magda's watchful eye. You and your eldest son repair the fence once more using branches scavenged from the woods. Each nail you hammer in, each furrow you plant, feels like a kind of prayer, a plea for mercy from a world that has shown you too much hardship and a promise to yourself that you will keep going. By midday, sweat prickles at your brow, but you welcome the ache in your muscles. It is the ache of possibility, of work that might yield something better. You trade news with your neighbor Gert. His son is mending, thank the saints. And together you dig a new trench for water, joking quietly, the heaviness of winter slowly lifting. In the afternoons, you help Magda gather nettles and wild greens from the hedgerows, supplementing your meals with whatever the land provides. The children laugh as they chase the hens, their laughter, so rare these past months, filling you with a warmth that no fire could offer. You share a smile with Magda, and in that moment, you know she feels it too. The world is not quite so heavy. Yet not all is simple or easy. There are still reminders everywhere of those who did not survive. The empty cottage at the end of the lane, the old woman who once brought you herbs, now gone. You tend her garden out of habit, hoping that by keeping her memory alive, you honor all that was lost. When you visit the churchyard, you whisper their names quietly, promising you won't forget them. The Lord's demands are unchanged, and the steward still visits, tallying every sack of grain, every egg, every hen. But now, you and the other villagers stand a little taller. Together you refuse to be cowed by the man's sharp eyes. You know what you have survived. You know what it took just to get to this spring. There is a dignity in endurance, a strength in simply remaining. As the weeks pass, shoots of barley and beans appear, and you allow yourself cautious optimism. The fields are not as full as before the plague, but each green sprout is a small triumph. Each row a testament to patience and perseverance. You walk the edges of your land each evening, counting the shoots, murmuring thanks to the quiet earth. Sometimes, as dusk settles, you sit outside with Magda, watching the stars emerge. In the vast silent sky, you speak softly, sharing dreams for your children, for a harvest that will fill the storehouse for a year without loss. Magda weaves her fingers through yours, her presence a steady comfort against all that remains uncertain. On Sundays, the village gathers, fewer in number, but closer in spirit. The priest's prayers are different now, less formal, more real. There is talk of rebuilding, of lending hands to those who struggle, of sharing not only food but stories and laughter. You realize, with a kind of quiet awe, that survival has knit you all together in ways you never expected. The village may be smaller, but its heart is stronger. One afternoon, as you lead the ox through freshly turned earth, your youngest daughter runs to you, clutching a wildflower. She thrusts it into your hand, her face alight with pride. "For you, Papa," she says, voice clear and sweet. You take the flower, its petals trembling, and press it gently to your lips. You realize then that hope is not a grand, shining thing, but a stubborn weed, growing in the cracks, blooming in the shadow of loss. It is present in every mundane task, every kind word, every meal shared around the table. As summer approaches, the work grows easier, the laughter more frequent, the hunger less sharp. Your body is still tired, your heart still marked by grief, but your spirit is buoyed by the knowledge that you have endured, that you have helped others endure. On the longest day of the year, you gather with your neighbors for a modest feast, a pot of stew, a loaf of fresh bread, a jug of ale. You remember those who are gone, but you also celebrate those who remain. The children dance, the elders tell stories, and for a few precious hours sorrow recedes. That night, lying beside Magda, you listen to the sounds of your family breathing, safe and warm. You think of all the days behind you, all the mud, the hunger, the frost, the endless aching work, and you marvel that you are still here. You close your eyes, a gentle peace settling over you. Is this what it means to survive? You wonder. To bear the seasons, to honor the loss, to find small joys and stubborn hope in the turning of the earth? And you, gentle listener, as you drift toward sleep, might ponder, what quiet triumphs, what simple acts of love and labor have shaped the history of those who came before us? How many hopes and dreams endure, silent, uncelebrated, beneath the steady rhythm of ordinary lives? At the far edge of a village shadowed by the memory of plague, there stands a crooked little Cottage, half swallowed by wild hedges and the creeping tangle of unkempt herbs. Here, each morning before the rest of the village has even stirred, Mistress Edith, known to most as the old herbalist, wakes in the dim gray light, surrounded by the musty comfort of dried leaves, jars of preserved roots, and the bitter perfume of rosemary and sage. You are Edith, and the world you know has changed in ways you never imagined. Once, your cottage was a place of quiet bustling. Neighbors stopping by to barter eggs for poultices, mothers whispering requests for teas to calm their children's coughs, the anxious and hopeful alike gathering at your door. You were needed, then sometimes resented, sometimes quietly feared, but always necessary. But the plague has altered everything. The lanes are emptier. The gossip has faded. Many of those who once sought your help have vanished, carried away by fever and sorrow. Now, most doors remain tightly shut, and when they do open, it is with hurried hands and averted eyes. Still, your duties remain, as relentless and rhythmic as the seasons themselves. Your days begin with small chores, turning the compost, feeding your one remaining chicken, coaxing life from tired beds of yarrow, feverfew, and mint. You tend each plant like a prayer, aware that even the smallest root might someday mean the difference between life and loss. The earth is stubborn, but so are you. Inside your cottage, rows of bottles and bundles crowd every shelf and windowsill. Some are labeled in your careful script: marshmallow for wounds, elderflower for fever, valerian for sleep. Others you recognize by sight and scent alone. Your fingers know the difference by touch, a skill honed by decades of necessity, trial and error. Breakfast is a crust of bread and a cup of bitter tea. You chew thoughtfully, listening to the sounds that filter in through your window, the coo of a mourning dove, the creak of distant wagon wheels, the lowing of a cow. You think not for the first time of those you have lost. Old friends, a younger brother gone to the city for work and never returned. Neighbors whose laughter is now only memory. Sorrow comes in quiet waves, but you push on, stubborn as the weeds you pull from your garden. Your first visitor today is Marta, the blacksmith's wife. She arrives at your door just as the sun breaks through the morning clouds, clutching a small basket of eggs in trembling hands. "For the cough," she says, voice thin and weary. You recognize the tightness in her shoulders, the same posture of worry you've seen 100 times. You accept the eggs and reach for a jar of honey steeped with thyme and licorice root, pressing it gently into Marta's palm. "Brew it strong. 3 times a day," you instruct, your voice steady, a quiet anchor against her fears. Marta nods, tears shining in her eyes, and you rest a comforting hand on her arm before she turns and slips away, as silently as she arrived. Afterward, you sweep the floor, grind dried willow bark for pain, and set out jars to catch the sun for infusing oils. Each task is small, repetitive, sometimes dull, but it fills the hours and distracts your mind from thoughts that are heavier than any bundle of herbs. You know some in the village distrust you, muttering about old magic, about the risks of a woman who knows the secrets of roots and seeds. But more often now, desperation outweighs suspicion. At midday, you wander the woods for new growth. The wild is where you feel most at peace, away from whispers, free to work with hands and senses, testing leaf against tongue, rubbing stems between your fingers. You fill your basket with nettles and dandelion greens, the first brave shoots of spring, and return home with mud on your boots and a sense of having done something useful, however small. In the afternoons, you tend to the sick. You sit at the bedsides of those left behind, an old man whose lungs rattle with every breath, a girl wasted by fever, a mother anxious for her newborn. You mix teas, wipe foreheads, whisper encouragements. Sometimes your work brings relief. Sometimes there is nothing you can do but hold a hand and wait. You are paid in eggs, onions, the occasional coin. More often you are paid in gratitude, a whispered thank you, a loaf of bread on your doorstep, the cautious respect of neighbors who understand that survival is seldom the work of one alone. You keep your bitterness to yourself when your efforts fail, burying it deep beneath the press of endless chores. Evenings are the loneliest. You sit by the fire sipping chamomile, your hands wrapped around the warm cup staring at the flickering shadows. You write careful notes in your old ledger. What worked, what did not, what you wish you had tried. You think of the future, and whether there will always be a need for your knowledge or whether, when you are gone, these shelves of roots and jars of tincture will gather dust in silence. Before sleep, you offer a simple prayer for the village, for the land, for the stubborn. Well, that keeps you moving. You wonder as you slip into uneasy rest, is it enough to labor quietly, to heal in small ways, to bear witness to the turning of seasons and the losses of a community? Or is there a deeper legacy in the lives you touch, the wisdom you pass, the silent strength of a forgotten healer at the edge of things? And you, gentle listener, might close your eyes tonight reflecting. How many hands working quietly behind the scenes have shaped the fate of families, villages, and generations, never remembered, but never truly lost? Morning light pours through, warped glass, touching jars of faded green and amber on every shelf. Mistress Edith wakes stiffly, shoulders aching from yesterday's labor, her mind already turning to the day's demands. Outside, dew glistens on wild thyme and chives, the garden quietly thriving despite the village's hardship. She rises, pulls a shawl around her narrow shoulders, and steps out into the chill, her breath white against the dawn. The work begins before breakfast. Edith moves carefully among her rows of herbs, pinching leaves, feeling for rot, coaxing each plant along with gentle words and the practiced patience of someone who knows what hunger, sickness, and sorrow can do to a body and a community. She gathers handfuls of yarrow, mint, and feverfew, laying them on a woven tray to dry, her fingers stained green and brown. A magpie calls from the hedge as she returns to the cottage. She takes it as a good omen. Inside, she sets water to boil, for tea, and slices a stale heel of bread. There is no time for more. Already a line is forming at her door, quiet and anxious. First comes Will, the miller's son, thin and sallow, clutching his arm awkwardly. He's been stung by a wasp, and though the pain is small, he weeps with the exhaustion of a winter spent hungry and frightened. Edith murmurs comfort, applies a cool compress of dock leaf and honey, then gives him a piece of licorice root to chew, a treat she saves for those who need cheering as much as healing. His mother leaves an onion in gratitude, thin payment, but it will add flavor to her evening broth. Next is Anne, whose cough lingers weeks after the fever has passed. Edith brews a strong decoction of horehound and marshmallow, sweetened with the last of the honey. Anne sits, shoulders shaking, sipping the bitter drink, and as she does, she tells Edith of the dreams that trouble her sleep, dreams of lost brothers, empty beds, the plague carts rumbling through lanes now silent. Edith listens just as she listens to the cough. She knows that sometimes healing begins with simply being heard. As the morning wears on, Edith tends wounds, soothes headaches, and mixes balms for aching joints. The visitors come and go quietly, slipping away before neighbors can take note, some still afraid of the old rumors, witch, widow, healer. She pays it no mind. Reputation matters less now than the comfort she can give, and if suspicion is the price of usefulness, she will pay it gladly. At midday, Edith leaves her home to check on those too frail to walk. She carries a satchel of dried herbs, a battered wooden bowl, a flask of cider vinegar, and a handful of small coins pressed on her by the grateful. She moves from cottage to cottage, stooping through low doors into dark, chilly rooms. In one she finds old Jacob, his breathing rough, fever burning his cheeks. She sits at his side, placing a cool cloth on his brow, coaxing him to sip her willow bark tea, whispering gentle encouragements. Sometimes in these quiet moments she feels a kinship with the dead as much as the living, her life bound to both by memory and care. Jacob's wife presses a withered apple into Edith's hand as thanks. "You're the last one who remembers. What my mother taught me," she says. "When you're gone, who will know the old ways?" Edith smiles, a touch of sadness in her eyes, but says nothing. Knowledge is a precious burden, especially when you fear it will die with you. After her rounds, Edith returns home, Exhausted, she kneels in the garden, digging a new bed for Fennel, fingers sunk in the cool soil. As she works, she remembers the voices of those who taught her mother, her grandmother, women whose names are now gone from the village but whose wisdom lives on in every tincture, every poultice, every careful note in her ledger. Evening brings a gentle rain, and with it, a rare visitor, Father Edmund, the village priest. He stands, awkwardly at the gate, his hat in his hands. Mistress Edith, the baby at the Coopers, she struggles to breathe, they're frightened. Edith nods, already moving to gather horehound and wild thyme, a small jar of honey, and a feather for clearing blocked noses. She walks with the priest through muddy lanes, the world washed clean by rain, the hush broken only by their footsteps and the distant roll of thunder. In the Cooper's cottage, Edith works quietly by candlelight, steaming herbs over the fire, teaching the mother how to massage the infant's chest and back. She leaves instructions, reassurances, and a promise to return in the morning. The family's gratitude is palpable, but Edith feels only relief and the familiar ache of worry, knowing there is always another need, another life hanging in the balance. That night, back in her own cottage, Edith sits with her ledger, recording the day's visits. Her script is steady, but her hands tremble. The stories of the sick, the dying, the hopeful, and the lost all find a place here, woven together with her recipes and observations. She writes not only for herself, but for those who may come after, those who will need these words when her voice is gone. Before sleep, she steps outside, standing in the damp garden, letting the rain wash away the tiredness clinging to her skin. She looks up at the night sky and whispers a small blessing, for the village, for the plants, for all the forgotten healers whose hands and hearts shape the world, unseen. As she returns inside, she wonders, is it enough to serve quietly, to heal where you can, to leave behind a record of care? Or does true remembrance live in the lives made easier, the pain eased, the hope rekindled in the darkest times? And you, gentle listener, may find yourself reflecting, how many histories have been written not in ink or stone, but in the gentle work of hands that mended, soothed, and remembered? By late spring, the hedgerows are thick with green, the world waking after its long hush of winter and grief. Edith rises with the dawn, the air through her window soft and scented with wild mint. Her steps are slow but sure as she moves through the tangle of her garden, checking each root and stem, eyes and hands learning, measuring, gathering. The plague may have loosened its hold, but it has not vanished. There are still coughs to soothe, wounds to dress, fears to calm, and the ordinary troubles of birth and aging to tend. Each morning brings a new line of faces to her crooked door. Edith greets them with her usual gentle firmness. There's the blacksmith's youngest, now growing strong again, whose cough lingers but whose eyes are bright. Marta, the baker's wife, come for help with swollen joints after weeks of kneading dough. And a handful of newcomers, distant cousins, orphans taken in by desperate relatives, who have learned quickly that help in the village comes not just from church or lord, but from the old woman at the edge of the wood. She sees to them all, parceling out teas and ointments, honey and advice. Sometimes a simple touch, a listening ear, does more than any concoction she can brew. In these moments, Edith feels a deep sense of connection, her own loneliness softened by the needs and stories of others. She remembers her own teacher's words, spoken in a kitchen filled with drying herbs and children's laughter. To heal is to listen. To listen is to love. When she is alone, she works on her ledger, adding notes and corrections, trying to put into words the things she knows by instinct. Which root calms a colicky baby? Which flower draws fever from the eyebrow? How to bind a wound so it heals clean. Her handwriting is slow, but she is careful, pausing to recall each recipe, each case. She worries over what will become of this book, who will care for it when she is gone, who will trust a woman's wisdom in a world still ruled by men and their suspicions. Still, the work is its own kind of legacy. The priest visits with news of recovery. Mothers send small loaves and handfuls of eggs. Children wave shyly as she passes. Even those who used to whisper witch or crone now leave small offerings, baskets of apples, sprigs of lavender, on her stoop. Bit by bit, the village remembers what it means to care for its own. And Edith, who once feared her knowledge would die with her, sees now that it lives on in every healed wound, every quiet act of neighborly courage. One afternoon, as rain drums softly on her roof, Edith is called to the house of young Alice, who has fallen ill with fever. The mother is frantic. Her only child, her last hope. Edith sits through the night, brewing teas, cooling Alice's brow, whispering old rhymes for comfort. She sings softly as she works, the lullabies of her own childhood. When dawn comes, Alice's fever breaks, her breathing easing at last. The mother sobs, clinging to Edith's hands. "You saved her," she whispers. Edith smiles, tired and grateful, knowing that sometimes all she can offer is time, presence, and faith that the body will do the rest. Days pass and the news of Alice's recovery spreads. More come seeking help, some just for a word of comfort, a blessing, a recipe for strength. Edith shares what she can, always careful not to promise too much. She knows, perhaps better than anyone, that healing is never certain, that every life is a dance between luck, labor, and the mystery of what endures. As the first harvest comes in, Edith helps gather herbs for winter stores, teaching the village women which leaves to dry, which roots to dig, how to steep and simmer and save. The children follow her through the woods, eager to learn, and she answers every question patiently, knowing that what she passes on may one day save a life she will never see. On the last evening of summer, as the sun sinks behind the woods, Edith sits in her doorway, her hands folded in her lap, watching the shadows grow long and soft. She thinks of all those she has helped, all those she could not, and she feels neither pride nor regret, only a quiet acceptance, a sense that her days have mattered, that her labor was not wasted. She lifts her old ledger, its pages thick with use, and presses it to her heart. One day someone will need these words. One day someone will remember the stubborn woman at the edge of the village, who trusted in plants and patience, who kept faith with the living and the dead. As the first stars appear, Edith offers a final blessing to the night. Let what I have learned be useful. Let what I have loved remain. She closes her eyes, listening to the hum of crickets, the hush of the wind through mint and sage. And you, gentle listener, as you drift gently towards sleep, might wonder how many lives have been changed by those who worked quietly in the margins, leaving behind not monuments or riches, but a legacy of wisdom, compassion, and care. So now, as our long journey through plague-haunted villages and weary medieval lives draws to a close, pause for a moment. Let the images settle in your mind. The cold stone floors of empty chapels, the stubborn green of wild herbs in the shadow of a healer's cottage, the calloused hands of farmers pushing life from thin earth, the tired faces gathered around, candlelit tables as another hard day slips quietly into night. These were not the heroes of history books. Their names did not echo in royal halls, nor did their stories find their way into the ballads sung by wandering bards. But in every village, behind every door, beneath every weathered roof, survival was a kind of quiet defiance. They rose each morning knowing what might be lost and choosing still to carry on, tending fires, mending wounds, sharing bread, and offering comfort where they could. Perhaps in the end, it was the small things that mattered most. A blacksmith's steady hammer, a widow's meager meal shared with a hungry child, a priest's trembling blessing, the careful gathering of roots and leaves by hands that remembered what others forgot. It was not grand deeds that carried them through the dark years, but patient persistence, kindness, and the silent courage to endure what could not be changed. As you drift toward sleep, remember, history is not only the story of battles, kings, and discoveries. It is the sum of these quieter struggles, these unnoticed acts of love, duty, and resilience. The past is crowded with ordinary people, each bearing burdens, each leaving behind a legacy of survival written not in stone, but in the living memory of all who came after. So let your breath slow, your mind quiet. Carry with you the lessons of these medieval survivors, the wisdom found in patience, the strength in simply enduring, the hope that hides in humble places. The world is, and always has been, made anew by the countless lives of people like you, imperfect, persistent, and beautifully human. Good night, gentle listener. May your dreams be gentle, your burdens light, and your heart ever resilient, just like theirs.